Came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand.
And we're back. Welcome to the Honor the Vision podcast. I am your host, Samuel Delgado. Today, I'm sitting with Chris Yearling, a local business entrepreneur, coach, and public speaker. How you doing today, bud?
Oh, fantastic. You got that.
I killed that intro this time.
Did it.
We
Zero
practiced.
practice.
Yeah,
Zero
practice.
practice.
Hey, man, it's an incredible honor to have you here on the show. You were one of the first people that I really started networking with here in San Diego, so you've seen me kind of, really dig in and settle into my home. We've worked on a couple of branding web projects together, and you kind of experienced that transition as well, as I went from working like a retail job for a few months when I first got here to get my foot on the ground. But before we jump into the plethora of topics that I know that we can get into, tell me a little bit more about like who you are, early childhood, and then we'll get into a little bit to the things that you've done here as an entrepreneur.
Nice. Nutshell. Raised in Hawaii, typical island fever, out of high school, decided to go out to the big world, came out to San Diego, fell in love, tried to move away 4 times, moved back 4 times, and I've essentially been here the better part of 20 years and have just stayed. And like many people in the mid-90s to mid-2000s, we all just stayed and made this town the badass thing that it is.
That's amazing. Something that I think is incredible is to so I know that I love San Diego and I just see and hear all these great things about Hawaii, but to think about a life where you grew up in Hawaii and you leave to come to the mainland and you land in San Diego and you're like, all right, I'm good.
Yeah. 2 really tough places, but someone's got to make the sacrifice.
That's amazing. What was it that drove you to want to leave the island? Is it just you felt like you were missing out on something that was happening in the rest of America, or was it just like that? For me, leaving the East Coast and going west was this pilgrimage of sorts, this journey that in the history books we've seen the cowboys conquered the West, and there's just this native, or not native, but instinctive feeling to go out and explore. I feel like sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. And yes. Yes, as in a feeling like I was missing out. And we can talk about FOMO running my life for quite a bit. So that's something I look back on. But it really was just an element of as simple as I found myself doing the same thing over and over in the same small world. And as much as Hawaii is paradise, if that's not the lifestyle you want, if you have a drop of exploration in you, if you have an ounce of ambition to explore, there are very structured limitations there. And as a 18, 19-year-old, not knowing how to pursue ambition on a small scale, which many people can do really well in Hawaii, I didn't. So it felt like a cage. And there was a good 3-4 days in a row, I ran into people I hadn't seen in a while, and they asked how I'm doing, and I said, same old thing, same shit every day. And casually say that, and about on the 4th day, I was like, what the am I doing? And my aunt was a professor at San Diego State. I called her up. I asked her how's San Diego, and she said, why don't you come find out? And so I went home and told my mom I'm moving.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was early childhood like for you? Do you have siblings?
I got the full Brady bunch. I think we're 14 deep at this point. There's very interesting childhood. So the typical father not around. Actually got a story. I could tell 2 perspectives of this, but just to answer this question, it's fantastic. I have a stepbrother, my best friend, who's my age, immediate family-wise, an older brother and an older stepsister who are all same age. So there's 4 of us in high school together, which made for quite the fun experience.
Wow, that's amazing. And of all those siblings, some of them are here and some of them are still back in Hawaii?
Everyone's back in Hawaii. My stepbrother, my best friend, is here, actually, in Oceanside now. He's a Marine, so he's back stationed in this area, which is always a benefit for me.
Wow. So you get to San Diego. How old were you then?
20.
What was it like to get here at 20 years old, fresh from the island? And I'd imagine there's some sort of adjustment that happens because from what I understand, even though Hawaii is in the United States, it has a lot of cultural influence and it's disconnected from the mainland as it is. So there's probably just like an entire like culture shock of sorts that you probably went through. And also just like, it can seem very like, whoa, like what is this whole new world that I've stepped into? And I'm sure San Diego then may not, you know, like you said, be what it is today, and have had that as media became a thing and like brought in so many more tourists and exposed, you know, this like hidden gem to the world. What was that like, man, getting here at 20 years old and, you know, acclimating?
Literally a whole new world, like The Little Mermaid. I mean, but at 20, I was excited about that, right? There was such an adventure to it. But you are right. Back in then, before technology and social media and even, I mean, internet for that sake had just started, Hawaii was essentially 5 years behind everything.
Wow.
We just didn't get a lot of stuff. So the biggest was communication for me. Because as many people know, when you get to Hawaii, we speak Pidgin. The funnest example I give people is Rob Schneider in 50 First Dates. That's how I talked. And so the idea of trying to be social and going up to people and then they look at you like, what?
Can you still do Pidgin?
It's one of those things when you go, I'm sure you guys are East Coasters. When
Yeah.
you go back home, I heard you on the other podcast, you talk about sunning.
Yeah.
You know, it's like one of those when you go back, if I'm with people from California, I start talking and then like after they look at me and they're like, what just happened?
Oh, that's
Or
hilarious.
when you're drinking, it comes out. The irony is when I got out here, I started to overcompensate. So for the first few years, everyone thought I was from the East Coast because I think I was trying to over-enunciate.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a specific accent that I take. I think over the years now I'm pretty West Coast in general, but I almost sounded like I was from Chicago for the first 3 years when I got here.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And just culturally, you know, Southern California is very mixed demographically, but like I would almost call it like a salad where the ingredients are still whole and separate. I truly came from a melting pot. And so there was a little bit of a dynamic that, you know, where I grew up, I was kind of the token white kid. I didn't have that. So like coming out here where people actually, even though there was a lot of different ethnicities, wasn't a lot of mixing of culture. So those are the two biggest. And I think now with social media, things have got a lot smoother and a lot better. And San Diego's just, at that time, you didn't meet people from San Diego. We were all transplants, either military or college. I had some 90% of the people I met.
Wow.
And then they just stayed.
What were I just think of like my early 20s. I'm still in them, but like, you know, like just being like 20, 21, when I say early 20s. Like what was it like, okay, I'm going to go get a job anywhere kind of thing? Like how did your journey into like what you do now begin? What was the origin of like career Chris?
Oh yeah. That's a 2-hour podcast for that answer. The origin's still happening.
Yeah.
It was an interesting way to just describe him as the kid capable of everything, unable to choose anything. And so that led much of the last 20 years. You add the FOMO and the need to please. And I ran a very large spectrum. There was no industry. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what path, you know, it was just a constant jump. So when I got out here, it was just typical. I worked at a bar and restaurant across the street from my house. I actually didn't stay in that. Ironically, one of the first businesses I opened 10 years later was my own bar. So I guess there's some tie back there. And I did a lot of health and wellness. That was one of the things I'd gotten into at 18, 19. We all started working out. And then I came out here. I studied kinesiology, fitness, nutrition, and health. From there, I did Southern California, started designing fitness centers, selling the equipment. That led to me doing small talks. After I would design a center, I would invite like other people from that industry. If I did, let's say, a spa, and I invited people from spa world and said, hey, this is the equipment you need. This is how you design it. And I started speaking, and that sort of rebirthed this idea that I liked talking. And I like being in front of the camera. I like being in front of people and impacting people, which then led to me sort of auditioning for the speaking career at 22 years old.
Wow.
I was one of the youngest. I landed a nationwide thing with Monster Worldwide at the time.
They were big.
Big.
Then.
Yeah, this
I mean,
Monster,
I think they're still really
Monster.com.
big, but like Monster.com.
It was it. There was no other
Yeah.
job site, right? And so they were doing this integration into colleges and high schools on these how-to speeches. And
Smart.
And just took that on. And like within the year, I was one of the lucky 10 that was certifying other speakers and traveling across the country, making all of $150 to travel, but all I got to do was see the entire country and speak to, in my 20s, I was at, 250,000 people, and fantastic. And then, one thing led to another. The entrepreneurship, the leadership started to come out. I didn't want to be a mouth for hire anymore, because I was speaking on I did a couple companies, but I did a lot of talking on other people's topics.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And then some traveling came in and came back, opened a bar. And then the last decade has been the doing. I used to talk a lot about doing.
Yeah.
And they always say people who can't do teach.
Yeah.
And I realized I was doing a lot of teaching.
Yeah.
And I hadn't actually experienced anything.
Wow.
So then I went out and failed and did and succeeded. And now here I am bringing it back to impact and teach after I've done.
That's, I think, such a huge, monumental thing that a lot of people skip over in a world where it's increasingly easier to just be the authority on something if you could take good pictures and clip the right sound bites. But there's just something that shows through when people are not actually, like, you can't fake that experience. That's just the thing. Like, you can be young and have experience.
Absolutely.
I think that, in my life, and it sounds like a lot in yours, like that was becoming an increasingly common theme, is like, oh, I can do a lot of different things. Like, you crack the code on like learning how to do things, which makes sense because I know that you design and build a lot of things, like literally and figuratively. I've seen, that, like I told you the other day, you have this like architect brain where you can have a very removed look at how things work and what those systems are, and the frameworks that, whether it's like taking actionable steps in your life today, or like this is what you need to do in the gym, to like, this is where the business, needs to be supplemented. Whereas for me, it's like, yeah, I learned how to do things, but I'm very much like hyper focused on one thing. And like when I go into something, I'm just like, I'm there and I'm like, all right, cool, we're good. This is good. Let's keep moving, kind of thing. There's a few things that you mentioned that I wanted to unpack. One, you got into health and fitness at a young age. When I got to Southern California, I had already kind of embarked on like what I think the keyword right now is peak performance. I think that's like where people are at. And I like read that yesterday and I was like, oh, I get what they're talking about now. Like I had seen that before, but I was just like, what the fuck are you guys talking about, peak performance? But I was like, oh no, I get it. Like a lot of my time now is just like, how can I optimize sleep? How can I optimize, my time at the gym, like my fuel, the nutrition I'm putting in my body. But when I got to Southern California, like there is like because of the weather, there's this culture here where it's just like everyone's trying to be like in really good shape. And so like that's become like a societal, almost to a fault at times, like,
yeah,
like certain gyms are like, no, that's not the place for me. I applaud what you're doing, but maybe just not the way you're going about it. What was it like in Hawaii? Does Hawaii also, being like an island, have that same emphasis? And like, what was it like at that young age to like really like adopt and step into like, okay, I'm going to focus on this in Southern California at 20?
Yeah, it twofold interesting on that. I want to talk about the definition of peak.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
I there's, I did a lot in health and fitness. I have a very holistic approach, and it's actually very anti-peak, because to me a peak is a peak. It's not meant to sustain. It's not a plateau. It's not a level you stay at. A peak is a place you get to and then come back down, which safety and everything. But Hawaii, the interesting part is I think Hawaii has the largest gap. You have the healthiest of healthiest people because it is active year round. You have the Ironman triathlon, one of the hardest single person accomplishments or sports or competitions.
So I know about the Ironman, right, but I didn't know that happens in Hawaii.
Yeah, and it happens in the Big Island of Kona. Like, it is not a fun environment. It is hot, and in that area of Kona, you're doing that. It's dry, but then you also have the island life, which can be very sedentary. So I think you have the widest gamut of people. But ultimately, as a kid, it was just active. It was just sports. But the actual coming into health and fitness just happened to be that one. I'd like to say there was something monumental, but it was just one of our buddies joined the Y. And so we all joined the Y. And then at that age, you just start working out. And then all of a sudden, for me, it was that first example of loving discomfort and understanding what good stress was in the name of growth, and delayed gratification of doing something and not expecting the result the next day, but then slowly getting it and not even seeing it until you start looking at before or afters from 2 months or 3 months later. And that was the first goal of like, oh wow, this is a good way to think.
Yeah.
And then I just fell in love with how I felt.
Yeah.
And so from
More
there, that
energy, increased levels of confidence.
And that was I don't want to do I was going into civil engineering. And I remember just looking around the class and I was like, this isn't the environment I want to be in. Like my brain loves it. I still, like you said, architectural, like I naturally go there, but there was something at that time that wanted to learn more about mind and body and physical aspects. And so that's what I came out here and did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The second part of that was going back to like your time in the speaking world. This was to paint a picture when you were in the speaking world and like helping train. Where was like content creation at?
What?
Like where?
A content what?
Exactly.
You know, I actually
did we have is like what speed of internet are we talking about? DSL, cable?
Yeah, 256K.
Okay.
I want to say.
Yeah. So not even a meg down yet.
Yeah, I guess it was the entire 2000, so it was up and down.
Yeah.
But I remember having my first blog. Definitely one of those hindsights, but this was maybe early 2000s. I had it on the Yahoo site builder, which, by the way, at the time was a drag and drop interface. Are
we talking about GeoCities right now?
No, it was the Yahoo site builder.
Okay, Yahoo had
that you could literally pop. I mean, this is like, it just disappeared. It wasn't fancy, but the fact that I could do that now, and like I look back now, I'm like, wow, I could do some cool shit back then.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote like 2 blogs.
Yeah.
And then stopped. But there was there was MySpace, which is music oriented.
Yeah.
And I think that's it.
Gotcha. So a lot of what like the public speaking that was happening was very offline. Like video was still very like cumbersome to stream. And so you could like what you were doing was very limited to like who was in the room with you.
There was no live. You didn't stream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know the reason
you couldn't even record on your phone. I remember this. You might have had that cool Nokia or the flip phone that recorded something that looked like a grainy security
420
camera.
By 420.
Yeah, I don't know what it was.
The reason that I bring this up is because I think that there's something to be said about the shift that has happened technologically and how it's affected and accelerated in many ways entrepreneurship and like things like public speaking. And to the point where like even right now we're sitting here creating content that will, be distributed on digital social media platforms, and we have the ability to impact and touch so many people. And so that idea brings up this, imposter syndrome, this like, oh, am I doing this right? And as I've sat here, this being episode 5, I'm already increasingly more comfortable with it. This has become a new norm. And I've spoken on this before and said like the new generation, like the way that like many things we did as we grew up, like whether that was like workout or like, be really good at video games. The next thing is like, even like, I think overcoming like style is like how easily you can create content and like how comfortable you are with it. So like the next generation is just gonna be like, here I am. Like, does anybody want to buy this t-shirt? Like, cause it's just become so like that this is an acceptable way to like share your story or message. But when you were, doing that and to have, stuck with it and to be here now and the like where you're at with your brand, it's kind of interesting, like to just like sit back and see that shift that's happened technologically. Where like Monster's still around, right?
I have no idea.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that, when I was building out your website I was putting in like, this work career, history, I pulled up their new website. I was like, oh, wow, they like shifted. Like they got a new logo, new website. But you don't hear about them as much as you did like back in like the boom of the 2000s when like the web 2.0 was starting to roll out and high-speed internet. But yeah, man, that's incredible to just think about that shift in technology.
Oh, it's a whole new world. I mean, that's and to your point about an expert, or to your point about experience, what I would say my experience is that I now can create content on to help people shift how they think and how they perceive the world, and therefore take different actions. Again, like one of my modes is, my passions is not to tell people what to think, but to help people in how to think, so then they can think for themselves and take actions based on that. So, but in terms of what you just said, the whole content creation side, I am 99% going to have to learn from somebody your age, who is an expert in the fact that you've had as much experience or more than most people my age.
Yeah.
And like, it's a wild learning lesson, and like a paradox to know that I have all of these outlets and I have really no idea how to use them properly.
Yeah, they're ever so changing.
It's almost like you just asked how when I moved to San Diego, and I'm like, oh my God, I can be in Mexico in 10 minutes, Vegas in 4 hours, like LA, I can surf and snowboard in the same day.
Wow.
And then you almost like have so much, you're like, I don't know what to do because I have so much. And I think for a lot of content creators my age who haven't been, even if you're up to date on what things are, and now it goes so fast, like it's amazing. Like all of a sudden you get inundated with the amount of opportunity that you have to remember to just start and pick one and do one and go, and not let it be perfect and not let it be amazing, because it'll get there. Because if you start to think of all the things that are possible, you'll never do it.
Where do you think this self-awareness comes from?
For me, I can't speak to anyone else, but it was finally stepping out of the circle, or actually recognizing the cycle. And I think that's why it's so important for people to put the work in as soon as they can to discover their patterns. But there was just enough of those moments where I'm like, wow, why am I here again? And there was enough times where you blame the other person, you blame the situation, the environment. And after a while, you finally start to realize that you're the common denominator. Wow. And a lot of it just came age, getting to 40, even having some of that regret and look back. And as much as people say that's a bad thing, in those moments, it can be a good thing because it's enlightening. You almost have to, I don't want to say rock bottom, that's dramatic, but you have to get to that point where you're tired of your own shit and tired of your own result and tired of blaming everybody else. Because at that moment, the more you blame everybody else, the more you don't have the control to stop the pattern.
Right. And
through both business failures and success, relationship failures and success, love and loss, that's where you start to realize, like, hey, I want to start something different. Like I know the result will be different, but only if the first step is different. And then that just starts that journey, and it's super uncomfortable. Like they really talk, depending on the coach or person you're talking to, whether they say it's unfolding layers or diving deep and undergoing this or being vulnerable or getting naked, like emotionally or physically, like it's just that whole thing. It really is. It goes, and honestly, it goes right back to the gym.
Wow.
Where I went, like all a workout is, you go to the gym to actually damage your body. Like that's what resistance training is. You literally tear.
Mind blowing.
Yeah, you tear your muscle, and then it repairs itself.
Wow.
And if you continue to do that, then your body goes, oh, I need to change, so this is no longer damaging. So that 15-pound bicep curl that used to hurt, all of a sudden it doesn't, because your body has built a new cellular makeup, muscle fiber addition, better recruitment of neurological function to say, okay, I can do that now without damage. And then you increase the weight or the number of reps, and it starts to damage again. And through that is growth. Emotionally doing that's pretty much the same process. It's just really fucking uncomfortable. And a lot of people, especially as you get older, the harder part is you don't like being shitty at something.
100%.
And you don't like being uncomfortable because you've sort of already done that. That's what your teenage years are for, right? You almost think like, I did my schooling. I learned my thing. I did this. I got to this physique. I did X, Y, and Z. I just want to ride it out from now on. And then you realize you're like, no, then you just die. And the cool part about getting older is that wisdom works in the same way.
Yeah.
So
there's something to be said about the fact that, with health and fitness, there's always kind of been like, whether it was right or wrong, like drink milk, right? Whether it was right or wrong, there was always been some sort of campaign or some sort of push. Because I think that when you think about like physical health and just like health in general, health and well-being, it's a more, oh shit, that's more closely tied to survival. So I'm going to focus on that. But when you talk about the emotional, for example, if when we were in school, they were like, yeah, you're going to have physical education because that's an important thing. And maybe we're going to cut some time out of some of these other areas and make sure that you understand awareness and like meditation and sitting still. And, like I largely believe a lot of the time that if we had been, and specifically for me, like if instead of like the English I figured out, and I'm thankful for like the ESL programs, but like if there was like hey, like guy in America that, like you see this like world in Hollywood and around you and your friends' dads and moms, but you go home to this entirely different dynamic. Like that's okay too, and here are some tools to be able to like regulate like those emotions that you might be experiencing and things like that. What age do you think is like good to like, actually even better, what would Chris now say to 20-year-old Chris that you've learned in the last, in that time frame in regards to like how to be more self-aware, and like what is that like cheat code you could have given yourself now looking back?
That none of it matters. Fail.
Wow.
And none of it matters not in the way to be reckless, but none of it matters that the story that you're making up. Because that the interesting part about physical, and regardless of what you believe, spiritual, religious, atheist, whatever, in this body, this human aspect, physically, we have to abide by the laws of physics, right? So there's some reality to that. There's a past and a present. You live and you die, cells reproduce and they stop. Emotionally, everything else is made up. Like everything else is perspective. There's every meaning, every story. That's all in your head. That's the holographic universe, right? That's your reality. Your color red, my color blue.
Yeah.
That's the stuff. So it's interesting.
Wait, that's not pink?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. To you it is. So it is. Why not? But we're at this very interesting time in both modern socialization where men have been sort of beaten out of, emotional intelligence for a long time. The nuclear family it wasn't a thing. We were taught X, Y, and Z to provide, to be strong, and all that came with this program. And so we're in an infancy stages. So that just has to trickle down. Right now, like more adults are finally getting into it. It's still new. We're still learning. Eventually, people will start to recognize that the sooner you start to embrace, having kids embrace this, that they will just get better at it, like anything. That you learn better when you're a kid.
Those mental reps, those emotional reps, resistance training.
Experience.
Yeah.
And then we're also in this interesting physical evolution where a lot of the innate biological things that are in us don't work or make sense anymore for what life is. Like your ego's not the enemy. Your ego is just not in line with life anymore. Like your ego is just a framework in which it takes all of your past experiences and predicts the future as a warning. And when back in the day, thousands, 10,000s of years ago, when every day was just to live, you needed that. That's all it was, reproduce and survive. So your ego did a really good job making up, don't eat that berry. Remember last time you got sick. But now it's like, oh, don't talk to that girl because last time you got offended and the people over there think negatively of you and that means you're not worthy of love. Like it doesn't know it's not helpful. It's just sort of doing what it's supposed to do. So it needs training and we don't have that in our life right now. So you have to go back and reprogram that.
Wow. And
that's what mindfulness and awareness comes into play. And to what you and I have talked many times off the podcast is the challenge with the woo of the world is there's a level of woo that people think that that's all you have to do, manifest.
For our listeners that don't have any clue what the woo is, how would you describe the woo?
I mean, anything you can think of right now. It's the meditate only, think only, the secret, the law of attraction.
Yeah.
But a lot of people take that as that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
And then you have on the opposite end, which is the do,
Yeah.
the rise and grind, the people who are like, just follow this program and you'll get anything you want, like do X, Y, and Z. And there's a flaw in focusing only on one of each. If you can't think yourself into change, you have to be very self-aware. You have to know why you are the way you are in this moment. Because if you aren't aware of why in the deepest of deep reasoning, the subconscious, the ego, and that program, if you're not really aware of why you're making the decisions, because 90+% of your decisions are made internally, not consciously. And I made up that stat.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's my favorite way to give stats.
But it's just to emphasize that point.
No.
You're not as in control if you think of it, because it's conscious thought takes a lot of energy. And so it's actually physically better for things to be subconscious. But when your subconscious is sabotaging you, that's where you create your cycles. But if you think about if your subconscious isn't in line, essentially it's just digging in the past as a means to control your present, which is why your future is always going to repeat itself. And so part of this process is learning how to gain executive control over the present, not just obsess over, so quote unquote, healing the past. Because until you gain executive decision over your subconscious, that then you can actually change your actions in the present in order to change the future result. Otherwise, your future is just predetermined through different experiences, but the result's going to be the same. So if you're not executively controlling your present, then your past is controlling your future.
Chris, clip that shit.
Yeah, spin that back.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Sip on that.
Something that, so some real life case scenarios. Okay. I want a Lamborghini. I'm thinking about a Lamborghini. I'm visualizing a Lamborghini.
Yes. Woo.
The woo. I've stepped into my most abundant timeline.
You are worthy.
I am worthy.
Did you look in the mirror and ask yourself if you were worthy? And I said
the affirmations, did the guided meditation.
You're done.
And by the way, I'm not talking shit. I am as spiritually woo as they come. But I think the point we're trying to make here is that you can't just think it into existence. There has to be a matching amount of action to back up. And maybe, and I think sometimes a better way is like the accountability. Like, are you tackling that the same way that you would tackle weight loss or the same way that you would tackle a project for work or school?
Yeah. And it's simply put. Yeah. Use your words. I haven't had that much scotch. Reverse engineering the outcome.
Yeah.
Is the easiest way to take conscious control over it. But ultimately, the mindset part of that you also have to do is, why do you want a fucking Lamborghini? And if you really dig deep, like most people, and I'll say most, again, making up a stat, but just for emphasis, will realize the only reason they want, and you'll hear a lot of really good coaches talk about the come from, is that Lamborghini. If you want it for any other reason outside of how you genuinely feel about yourself and the experience of having that Lamborghini, if you really are visualizing, again, not a knock, because I think meditation, manifestation, law of attraction, those are all core. Those are step one. Like that is a very valuable piece.
Yeah. It's a great tool in the toolbox,
but it is
for sure.
Yes. But it's something you always do, but ultimately it's also step one.
Wow.
You can't just do that. But if you dive all the way down, a lot of times you're going to find like, I want that. Why? What am I picturing? I'm not picturing the experience I'm having in a Lamborghini. I'm picturing the conversation I'm having with somebody else about me having a Lamborghini. I'm picturing somebody else look at me. I'm picturing that girl. I'm picturing my worth, because now I can ask that girl out. And if that's your motivation, again, you keep digging, there's a reason for that. And ultimately, you don't really want a Lamborghini. You want to feel valued and worthy.
That's interesting.
And so that's really what you got to dig into. Now and we've had this conversation off the podcast, so I can genuinely say you want a Lamborghini, like as a performance vehicle. That's the driving experience you want. And so that's the other thing. I'm not talking shit about anyone who's like, I want $1 million, I want a Lamborghini, because you might actually have a really genuine, deep desire for that car. That's your favorite car. Great, go fucking get it. But
and they make them to be bought, you know.
Yeah,
I've always told people that.
And that's the magic
someone's
mix.
got to buy that
Someone's got to buy it. But that's the magic blend, because if you genuinely get down to the core and you're like, you know what, I fucking really want that car. Now go take action, and it's so in line, like it will be that much easier to go get that car. And when you get it, you'll be fucking fulfilled. The other option is if you only do the action plan and you don't do any self-care or self-work and you're just distracting yourself with rise and grind stories, then that's your quintessential, I get the Lamborghini and I'm still fucking miserable and I'm still lonely and I still don't think I'm worth love, or whatever it is that's coming up. Or you make the million and you're like, now I got to go make another million. Now I got to make 100 million. I'm going to 10X the shit out of this. Like, what's the difference between, so I just had this conversation earlier. What's the difference between 10 million and 100 million for you?
I mean, honestly, there's no difference at that point. I think it's just another couple zeros. It takes the same framework in place. Yeah, exactly. The self-limiting belief, and then this is where like the woo would say like, like you're just living in like you're speaking from a level of poverty, which is the same as saying you have limiting beliefs about money because of like where you come from and the experiences and relationships you've had with money.
Yeah. And here's two kickers I love just because we're on that conversation. And I know you and I have so many conversations about the woo. Two things. One, affirmations are great, but they're useless unless you prove yourself right. So unless you have an action plan mapped out, like I think it's great. Write your affirmations down, write them on the mirror or do it verbally, do your mirror mantras, whatever you want to call it. You should do that. It's a great fucking way to start the day.
Yeah.
But if you don't also say what that does, like I am worthy. Okay, well, what does a worthy person do? And if you don't go do that, here's the negative part to only doing self-care is at the end of the day, you're going to have proved yourself wrong. And you'll put your life under a microscope and you'll start to be more self-analytic. And then every day you're just going to have to start telling yourself you're worthy, but deep down you'll be like, but I'm not. And then you're going to prove yourself. You're either proving yourself right or you're proving yourself wrong.
That's right.
So like to me, like unless you have an action plan, unless you really map that out, and then unless you also embrace the challenges you have in the present, and you have to embrace the fact, and I rarely say you have to, because I usually just want to give perspectives, but it's really important, or I challenge everyone to think about the idea of the fact that you have to have your conscious and unconscious or conscious and subconscious, depending on what you say, they have to work together. It's not like your mind doesn't get in the way. You can be overthinking and you can get in the way of yourself, but you got to know that the two got to work together. Like you need your conscious mind in order to reprogram your unconscious mind.
Something I think is incredibly like obvious, but we don't think about it often enough, is that we live now more than ever in a world full of so many distractions, and that's where that FOMO comes from. At any moment, like for example, I follow 1,000 different people on Instagram. That's a lot of fucking different people doing jet skis, Cabo, like humanitarian mission. Like there's just so many other like virtual realities that I could emulate in my mind and be there. In that same form, we're getting like these, like entrepreneurs that are at different chapters in their journeys. And I'm at chapter 2 and I'm like looking at this guy at chapter 22 and I'm like, well, fuck, that looks sick. But like, how did he get there? And there's a lot of like old proverbs that will tell you that, successful people, whatever that is to you, leave clues. And I think that like you said, we're kind of figuring it out collectively as, people that, you have to do this shadow work. You have to unpack these things that happened to you in your childhood that may have left lasting impressions that are impacting you when it comes to being vulnerable in your commitments and in your relationships. You have to audit and monitor the inner voice and the way that you speak to yourself and the way that you also discipline yourself. And the way that you build that muscle is by starting to address those things. Mm-hmm. And the big part of that is auditing. So like, why do most people, and I can speak on this because like I've had the biggest crash course in finances from somebody who's, grew up in, I don't want to say poverty because I don't want to make my parents look bad, but like, I grew up poor and, came into money when I started doing, like a high ticket, service to the world as a creative. I didn't know what to do with the money because like I had for so long wanted all the gadgets and, all the clothes and, boom, 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 boom. And then I'm just like, okay, fuck, where's all my money going? You know, like I see people that make less get further. And I was like, okay, it's time to audit. And so in the same way that you audit financially, you can audit physically, like what am I eating, right? And that's where the whole conversation of macros comes into play. And it's like, well, I'm having too many carbs or, whatever the diet you're on. And the same thing happens, I think, in the mental, spiritual space where like these tools can be very, like visualizing helps, because like if you're not, then what are you doing it for, right? And meditation is a great way to just kind of like block out all those distractions and really come home to yourself and sit with, oh shit, here are the things I'm actually supposed to be doing, but I got distracted by X, Y, and Z. And it's so good now, man. Like the shows, the YouTube content, the TikToks, the Instagram reels, like there are so many ways to escape your reality. And
never in history have you been able to lose 45 minutes in 2 seconds.
oh man.
That wasn't even a joke, but yeah, I mean that's a legit time warp. Like the times you look down and you hit a reel or something, and then you just look up, you're like, oh shit, and it's gone. I love two things. I love what you said. One is the audit.
Yeah.
I appreciate genuinely the idea of looking back into the past to discover the potential. And I always say potential because you can make a correlation of what caused, whether it's one event or a million little events, right? But I love the audit because ultimately I would challenge people to stop trying to heal the past and heal the present.
Oh, shit.
Okay? One caused the other.
Right.
But only one you can change.
Wow.
So I get it if it was a parental thing or an abuse or a trauma. I get it. There's a ton of really cool exercises to do or programs to do, hugging your inner child, shadow work, etc. But ultimately, unless you're embracing that part of you, that subconscious programming as who you are now, and then you take the judgment away from that, I have a bad relationship with money because I have a lack of you could go back and be like, oh, how do I figure out how to hug my parents and say it was okay? Or you can be like me, the grown-ass adult, I have this fear of success or fear of love or lack of money or low self-worth. How do I address that now? And how does it impact my life now? And that's the audit.
Wow.
And you do that physically too. I mean, you've done it. Damn it. I don't know, for anyone who isn't familiar with Sam, like when I first met him, he was how many pounds heavier?
It's probably closer to 50.
50. I mean,
yeah.
It's a different man in front of me right now.
I remember because it was probably one of the pictures that Zeke took of me and you when we were beginning that branding project, where I looked at myself and I was like, that is not me. Like, and I was just like, we got to do something about that immediately. And I think that even then I was talking to you about fitness and like this path I'm on, and, I was doing like the meal prep, but yeah, you got to audit. And this is something I feel like I can speak with you, and you can, kind of give some perspective back to me. And for the creatives out there or entrepreneurs that may be listening, I'm often the first one to fall on my sword. Like if I fuck up, I'm like, okay, that was me. I fucked up. I'm sorry. Like I'm not going to bullshit you. I'm not going to give you any excuses. Here's my plan to get out of this scenario. And I hope that by sharing this could be an example to, the 20-year-old Sam out there that's, getting started in the creative world. But the thing that I've lately had to audit is like over-promising, under-delivering, not saying no enough, understanding the value of saying no, understanding that not every project is meant for me as much as I want to help everyone. Mm-hmm. And that is a matter of like, when I sit and I cycle through like, why did I do that? And it's like, it's this like going back to this like poverty, scarcity, like it's like, fuck, like I need that. Cause if I, and oftentimes had I said no, there may have been a better opportunity around the corner. Oftentimes had I said no and focused on the two that I did have in front of me, I would have done a much better job with that relationship, with that project, where like they would have gone out and advocated on my behalf. And I think presently as I sit here, you know, and I think about like, you know, our relationship was one where it was like, oh, fuck, like I really like this guy. I really like his project. And I was managing this balance of like working, you know, this like retail job and trying to get my business started again. And it often felt a lot like a roller coaster. And like trying to filter out all those distractions and trying to like, you know, feel at home in a new place. And like sometimes to an extreme, working too hard and then burning out creatively, and like then sitting there with all the desire to want to build something and not be able to, like, you know, I click as much as I want, you know, and it's like it's not moving, because creativity can be, you know, like, yeah, that's where you get in the conversation like flow state. So you know, this has definitely been one of the things that I've been auditing more. It's like, how can I show up better for the people in my life, whether they're like business partners, whether they're clients, whether they're friends. And, you know, it's almost one of those things where like, if you don't consciously audit these things almost like on a daily basis, it doesn't have to be a stressful thing. You know, that's the thing. That's why we don't want to audit things. That's why we don't want to look at the bank account and see how much we spent. That's why we don't want to think about what we ate yesterday. We're just like, no, we're going to start today. And where does that come from? That feeling?
Well, I mean, you said it right there. That's the judgment.
Yeah.
And that's why I said the audit has to come without judgment. And that's where self-work comes into play. I mean, your bank account's not going to change whether you look at it or not.
That's true.
Right? Like,
it's factual. It's very
you
linear.
have to be able to say it is what it is. And it's okay to say, you know what? I just looked at that picture. I'm fat.
Yeah.
Be like, don't say that about yourself. Like, I'm not judging it. I can look at this as call a spade, or a matter of fact. I can look at my bank account and go, I'm broke. And you have to hit that point, because then you're like, okay. And like, what I loved about you, and hey, it's you doing this at your age is phenomenal in general, but what I loved about you through our process is you did own your shit. You did accept things as, like, when we had our challenges, like, I messed up here. I own that. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm a failure, blah, blah. There was no story. It was like, but I also understand that that's not acceptable. And like, how do we move forward? And that's all failure has to be. So that's all that audit has to be. And you have to be prepared to do that. Like, I am broke right now. I am overweight, or I am uncomfortable. I am unhealthy. I am X, Y, and Z. It is okay. It's not okay to continue because this is getting in the way of the life that I want to live. But it's okay that I'm here. So take the judgment, throw it out the window, because that's all that is. The reason you're not checking your bank account isn't because you know or don't know there's money. It's because you're worried that means something about who you are to other people. That's that mirage, right? That's the shit that we're making up. That's your own reality. Most of the time we're wrong. That's why failure is so important. And that's why I would challenge like the part of the youth now where we're so avoiding the idea of failure. Everyone's a success. Everyone gets A's. Nobody loses in a sport. Like, what the fuck? Yes, you lost. There's a winner and a loser. You played. Those are the rules. You lost. How about we teach kids that it's okay, that you losing that game doesn't make you a loser.
Right.
But you lost that game. Yeah. What are the lessons? Did you play hard? Did you prep?
Where could you have improved?
And do you want to improve? Is this something you want to go into? Okay, well, now put some work into it. And then you grow from there. That's the bigger learning lesson. And so the same thing, when you audit, like, if you start to judge yourself in that audit, go back and get that self-care. Go back and get into that. You got to get to that point, because you have to be able to audit it to move forward. But you have to be able to audit it and not think shitty of yourself. Because the minute you do that, like, owning your shit without judgment is the most empowering thing you can do. Because if you go, you know, fuck, I'm fat. That's okay. I can get skinny. Or healthy. I don't like the word skinny, but
right.
Can't do that until you get to that point. Like, that to me is fucking quintessential. That's the heat right there. Yeah. Like that is so perfect.
That's definitely the key, the takeaway from this show. I want to take us for a transition here before I ask you about the two more things. You're wearing the Beyond the Teams hat today. I thought this was a super cool. I was living vicariously through your Instagram stories. So tell our listeners a little bit more about this and what this experience was like, and what it was.
Yeah. Multifaceted. The foundation of anything, if there's a nugget to take away for people, impact wise, it's just travel and do things. There's no greater learning lesson than culture, especially in this world of confirmation bias and getting into your own bubble. And COVID has only spun that in general, right? The lockdowns where people are more and more judgmental and angry about people they've never met. Back to 300-mile journey, I do competitive outrigger paddling. So the Hawaiian canoes that most people, if you can picture the 6-man canoes with that outrigger on it. And I race in San Diego. There's a club, and it's competitive. It's a very, very fun, it's a phenomenal sport of both teamwork and mental integration, because it's one of those sports, there's no timeout, there's no pause, and you can spiral really quickly if you don't focus inward on what you're doing to contribute to the boat. But this amazing journey was, there's a group of retired Navy SEALs who have formed an organization to raise awareness and funds for, various elements of SEAL life, SEAL family during or post the duties of SEAL that doesn't get attention or federal funding. Like maybe they don't, like Wounded Warrior helps, but they're in other areas. Like the SEALs get X, Y, and Z, or they don't. And so these guys are late 50s to late 60s, still just, they're SEALs and their mental toughness, and they do these crazy adventures. So about 6 months ago, they got connected with our club, and they decided that they want to do a 300-mile paddle.
Insane.
Yeah, and just to put that in perspective, the two biggest sort of races in this sport, like the Molokai Channel in Hawaii, you race from Maui to, you race from Molokai to Oahu, is 42 to 44 miles. And there's a 3-day in Tahiti that you do a total of 72 miles. So we did 300.
They wouldn't be SEALs if they weren't pushing
Yeah. And we weren't racing, but we were just trying to accomplish it. And there's people that swap out. So we decided to go from Key West around the tip of Florida, Miami, all the way up to Fort Pierce, almost Orlando, essentially. And we did about 40 to 50 miles a day. And the physical pressure as well as the mental capacity, but being in a group of people, the takeaway from this, as cool as that was to go on different and a new spot every night and see the cultural variation and all that, the coolest part was to see these guys who naturally embrace discomfort.
Embrace the suck.
It's so, but I have to convince myself, right? Like, I gotta go to the gym. I don't want to go to the gym. The hurts, but I know it's good for me. Like, I talk. Prime example to sum up the whole trip. There's 6 seats in the boat, and they all have different roles. And one of the guys had never sat in seat 5, which, in all accounts, when the water's calm, it's sort of I don't want to say least important, but it's kind of the most boring seat. You're just in front of the steersman. But when it's rough, you're doing a lot. You're responsible for everyone in front of you. You get to see what everyone in front of you is doing, and you're helping the steersman. And so it was rough waters out there. We got beat up by some weather, and it was his first time in 5. And immediately when we got out, the first thing he said was, "That sucked." I need more of that.
SEAL say, "Oh wow!"
But it would that's where it's subconscious. He didn't be like, "That sucks. I'm not sitting there again."
Yeah.
It was like, "That sucks. I want more. I need to do that more, because then it'll be comfortable." The uncomfort gets comfortable, but you have to go through the discomfort to get there. So every comfort that is fulfilling, every comfort that you truly want, is through the discomfort. If you're getting comfort without the discomfort, that's a convenience. And we live in a world where we're chasing convenience, and it's becoming really inconvenient because we're more unhealthy than ever.
That
disconnected.
Sometimes looks like, oh, I went to the gym for 2 months. When does cardio get easy? That shit doesn't get easy. What gets easy is accepting that you're going to sit there and do that for 30, 45 an hour, increasingly as you go through these levels. That's what gets easy. But the actual physical exertion, at some point you become conditioned, right? And it's not as hard as when all you did was sit at a computer chair.
Here's a good quote I saw. I'm not going to take credit for it, and I don't know who to give credit to, but it was a meme. But what I love is, life doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. So cardio doesn't get easier. Like, that action isn't necessarily, gravity hasn't changed, right? The machine doesn't, nothing's changed. You just stronger. Your body adapted to it. I think also, just going back to our health and fitness, because I love it. And it's, I'm still working on projects involved in that. And it goes with anything in life. Like, we have this mode right now with the instant gratification that we're always trying to hack. Like, stop hacking. Like, I'm going to go crush the gym. Why? Because I sat around all day and did shit. You know, like even meditation and stuff. I'm going to meditate because the rest of my day is going to be like a chaos. You could also work on grounding out most of your day. You could also work on being healthy and moving throughout the day. And it would take the emphasis, and it goes back to peak performance. A lot of those elements that we use to get us to par should be used to get us to peak. So if you're meditating, if you're doing self-care, if you're doing athletics, fitness, and health, those are things that should be elevating your average, not getting you to average. So if you're only doing those things to hack life, like, and again, until you audit the rest of the time, to get that shit done first, because otherwise you're so much more likely to disappoint yourself. You're so much likely to not sustain it. You're so much likely to get injured or disappointed, because when you're going at it to hack something to make up for it, I'm going to go 2 hours on the treadmill because I can eat pizza tomorrow. Like, when you're doing a transactional equation, it's not going to work. There's a lot of money in selling programs like that. But ultimately,
Everyone sells the cheat codes.
everyone sells the 6-minute abs
Yeah.
and the 3-minute meditations. And, you know, it's a good sell. And again, not that they are bad, but the fact that those should be step 2 or 3. There's a lot of step 1 out there, and it's getting your whole day and your whole life. Like, what I like to work with people, I work with health, life, and business. They're not separate. I mean, if you have a business or not, or in your life, but like, they're all intertwined and they all affect one another. Like, you see the movement in CEOs and everything. They have the physical trainers and mindset and stuff, like, as part of ways to make them better CEOs. Like,
Yeah.
your fitness regimen helps your relationships.
100% agree.
Yeah, look, I mean, you feel
100%.
when you feel better, when you look better, like, you show up better, not just because you're more attractive.
Yeah.
But-
Because you're doing the hard shit, man. You're waking up early. You're eating right. You know, you're respecting yourself more. And so you respect other people more. Your time is more valuable. And so other people's time is as valuable, you know? And there's not enough that can be said about that. It's a large part of the reason why when I got here, I was like, well, since I'm starting from zero anyways, I might as well start the right way. I might as well associate myself with the right people and not be so caught out by this, like, fear of missing out on things that, like you said, don't really fucking matter.
Well, I am honored to be one of those associated people.
My guy, it's been an absolute pleasure. In many roles, you have mentored me, whether you knew that or not, by just seeing where I was at and understanding that, and also by, like, never being easy on me, by never, like, accepting bullshit. And those are the kind of people that I need in my life. You know, the idea of that iron sharpens iron. I had so much more that I wanted to go into with you, which is exciting because that means there will be an opportunity for another episode.
Season 2.
Yeah, on season 2 of the
And the
Art of Vision
podcasts are 3 hours long.
Yes, sir. When people stick around for that long.
How many of you listening are like, no, don't end? Some of you are like, thank God.
Okay, cliff noted. Oh, man. Actually, I had somebody tell me that my voice was very, what is it, ASMR? Like,
Oh, I was like, you're like 90s late night love radio.
oh, I love it. Welcome back to the Art of the Vision podcast.
Next
question
Boys
for
to
you
Men.
before we close out is a new segment to the show I'm introducing.
Okay.
When you see the words Honor the Vision, when you see the brand, not necessarily associated with me, what does that make you think? What does that make you feel? How do you honor the vision?
I'm going to have to try to step out of the bias because I know you and we've had so much speak to this. So I think my natural gut reaction might be a little filtered. But it truly goes back to the ideology we talked earlier about reverse engineering, but creating that vision from the most grounded place and then truly honoring, like, that's the roadmap to that vision. And don't go anywhere else. Don't be influenced. You can be inspired by people you care about and respect, but don't be influenced by everything around you. Like, truly honor that roadmap, honor that vision, because that is your promised land, right? Like, that is where you want to be. That's most likely, if you've done the work, or you truly understand yourself and your emotions and your subconscious needs and wants and what fulfills you, what makes you happy, that vision's clear.
Wow.
So just go there. And there's going to be a ton of other visions along the way, but honor the. I actually want to emphasize the in that one.
I love that. Chris, how can people find you? How can they work with you?
My website, which you've done gracefully, we got a phase 1 in. It will be changing, but don't worry. ChrisYerling.com. Last name is HJERLING. It's very fun to grow up with. Makes fun at Starbucks and school. But Chris Yerling, my handle pretty much everywhere. That is the one thing about having that name. I never had to add a hyphen or a dot to anything, including emails. So Chris Yerling at Gmail, Chris Yerling Instagram, Chris Yerling Facebook, Chris Yerling LinkedIn, and ChrisYerling.com.
Love it. And how can people work with you?
So many ways. Business-wise, I love doing cool shit with people I like. But I do coaching or speaking if you have some content you want to be taught on. It's also if you're just anything that resonated with you today. I do have a Flywheel of Change coaching program that's in its final development stages. It's just really cool shit. Everything, the 50% woo, 50% do, man. Let's get together and make some shit happen in your life. I don't want to tell you what to do, but I'm going to make you the person you want to be capable of getting what you want in life.
I love it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Later.
Peace.
I came from the mud.